Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Here lately we've been doing a lot of Fbody tubular front kit installs, and I know that we don't have an official video kind of showing the process that we go about doing that. So I'm going to try to take time here now to kind of show you the steps that we take getting the car started. Cutting the car, we've got a Trans Am behind us that's got one already on it pretty much. And then we've got a Camaro that I just started this morning. So I know it's already cut off. Cutting it off is pretty self-explanatory, but I'm going to show you how we kind of get the car set up on the lift, how we can make sure the frame bars are square, the measurements you should have on your headlight brackets. In a I know we have some general install instructions that give you measurements like from the tower to the back of the bracket and stuff, but because we have an actual fixture in the back room here that we bolt onto the shock towers that puts them where they need to be on every single car, whether it's a Trans Am or a Camaro, I can verify for you guys what those measurements are as far as their height, their spread in between them and stuff like that. That might assist you a little bit further getting your headlights and stuff lined up. So let's get started. So when doing a front end kit install, it doesn't matter if it's on an Fbody or a Fbody or S197 car, 3rd gen, whatever one we offer, we always recommend leveling the chassis before you ever get started. And this is also explained in our Fbody tube front install video. But for this particular chassis, the Fbody, the flattest area of the whole car to check levelness back to front is going to be on the inside of the door here. So we use digital angle finders just because they're small and you can get them in tight places. But just when you're using it, make sure it's not twisted like this. Make sure it's pushed all the way up against the back side of that piece of plastic. That way you're not getting a false reading. So right here on the lift, we've got 1/10 of a degree, and that's good enough for me. So we know our chassis is pretty much level. So whenever we put our frame rails on later on down the road, we can put it at 0.1 if you want to get super technical, or 0, and we know that they're going to be level in accordance to what the chassis is and not pointed towards the ground or pointed up towards the sky, because the fender bars are pretty much going to fit wherever the frame bars are, unless they are like 6 inches off or something like that. They're going to go on there and seem to fit right. So you want to make sure that your frame rails are level with the chassis. So now we're going to jack the car up, and I'm going to just show you how we pull the center line of the chassis to where we can make sure our frame rails are coming out straight. And then after that, you'll be good to go as far as starting your install. So underneath the car now, finding the center line of the chassis. Find 2 common points underneath the car that you can drop a plumb bob off of. So the one that we normally use for the Fbody is right inside the frame rail here, not like way up in here where it tapers out, but right at the corner, right as soon as it starts to get flat. Just put your finger right there, a piece of tape or whatever you got to do to hold the string on the plumb bob, and let it come down to the floor and make a mark. Do the same thing on the other side. Come down and make a mark. So then you want to take a straight edge like I've got here in the way on the floor and find the measurement between those 2 marks, because you want to find the middle. So what we've got here, we've got like 32 1/4 basically. So 16 1/8 is our center point. So we make a mark. Do the exact same thing on the front. Set that down. We normally go on the inside face of the frame rail, right about where you're going to be cutting. Now this one's already cut, but you can do it without it being cut. That's what we normally do. But same thing. Drop the plumb bob, make a mark there. Well, you can't see it. There in this case. Find your center point. I forget what exactly the measurement was, but because we have concrete floor, we just use a chalk box, just like a a carpentry person or a carpenter would. And we pulled the chalk line way out here past the front of the car. Now this is going to help us because when we put our frame rails on, we can put a square, we can drop a plumb bob off the end of each frame rail in the middle of the tube, or the inside of the tube, outside of the tube, whatever, make a mark, and we can tell how far the tubes are shifted sideways. I don't care how square you think you cut, you don't cut square first time with a Sawzall. So this will help you get your frame rails coming straight out. And let me grab the phone and we'll go to our next step. So as far as cutting the car, just some general things to think about. And this is not rocket science. You're just operating a Sawzall, as we call it. So just don't cut too much. That's the main thing. So on your frame rails, it's in the instructions, but the general area you're going to cut the frame rails is where this little peak comes out and touches. It'll be on every F-body, even this one over here, which you can see where it touches the frame rail. Now this is not cut all the way because we're gonna shave all this out and stuff, so we just left it a little bit long. So just make sure right where that touches the frame rail, that's where you cut. That's the general area. If you cut too much, don't worry about it. It's just going to reduce the amount of stick out you have on your frame rails beyond the fender bars, which is not, it doesn't make or break anything. That's the beauty about all of our front end kits. They're individual pieces, and if you get off on one of them a little bit, nobody's going to know except you. It's still going to look the same visually and function the same. So there's your frame rails. I haven't got these really prepped because they're really dirty. This is all rough cut, nothing's been squared up or anything. So now moving to your fender aprons, or whatever you want to call these, as far as where to cut on these. This is a piece, I had to cut multiple cuts on this one just because I had wire and harness and stuff, so I had to take it out in kind of pieces. But this is a section that I cut off the front of this. Your cut is going to want to be right at the back side of that hole. Now that hole was just about on every one of these chassis. It's a factory speed hole, I guess you'd call it. Your cut needs to go right through the back side of that. That's going to give you enough meat left over in the front of this where you can sand it back to fit. You don't want to try to make exact cuts the first time because you're not going to. It's just nobody's that good with a Sawzall. If they are, then more power to them, but I'm not. So leave yourself enough meat to sand back as far as the fender bars go. And another thing to think about as far as being critical, if your fender bars, if you cut too much and these end up being a little bit further back, no big deal, because nobody's going to know except you. They're just going to move back a little bit on the frame rail and they're still going to fit just as good down on the bottom. So don't sweat it. Just leave yourself a little bit of extra length whenever you do cut it. That way you can sneak up on it, because that's what we do here. So that's pretty much it as far as cutting it off. Then the rest is obviously prep work. Sand all this really good, which we'll get to that in the next little section of the video here. Fast forward just a little bit. I was out on Friday, but the guys did get the bars, or the main bars of the tube front, welded in. I've got I remocked up the plumb bobs just to kind of show you what I'm talking about here as far as checking your squareness of your frame bars. So the center line, Joey used a permanent marker and kind of drew it where the chalk wouldn't go away with us walking around and stuff. But we basically just use a large framing square and lay it on this line, and then go over and let the plumb bobs go on the inside of the frame rails. You know, get it as close as you can, because you know obviously the square is not going to be long enough if it gets way out if you're using a smaller square than this. But make your marks and make sure you're at the same distance from this center line at the end of these frame bars, which we've got like 15 5/8 here, and we've got the same on the other side. So if you're on a concrete floor, this is the best way to make sure your frame bars are square. This center bar here, we just got kind of put in there to set the width. It may move depending on where we mount this guy's radiator, and you can put it wherever you want to. It's not really, just as long as it goes in between there somewhere. Now you can see these are welded on. These welds are probably not going to be the most beautiful. These look pretty decent, but this body metal welds like garbage, and it's usually, I mean, we sanded the crap out of this, and it's still, you know, pretty dirty metal to weld on. This metal is a little bit thicker right in this area. You can usually do a little bit better here, but like I said, just do the best you can, because you are dealing with body metal, and if you don't move pretty quick, it's going to bubble up and pop and just make you mad. So just do the best you can there. So now it is time to get our fixture on here, and in our case get our fixture on here and get our headlight brackets mounted up, and do all that. And then once we do, we'll show you some measurements and stuff to go by, both for the Camaro here and the Trans Am over there on the other lift, just so you can kind of have a reference. So the headlight brackets are on. You can see we use the fixture and how it kind of goes on. If you're doing a lot of these, if you're a shop, I suggest make yourself a fixture. It'll save you a ton of time. And ours, you've seen it bolted on the top, the two inside bolts of the strut towers here, that come out, and it's just some kind of cobbled together fixture, but it works. It saves time because you don't have to measure anything. You just bolt the brackets to the fixture, puts it in place. But for those of you guys that don't take the time to do that after many installs, if you're just doing one install and that's it, we're going to start including a little gauge to help you guys line the headlights and stuff up. And we've had so many phone calls about doing that having both these cars in here, we just decided to put something together that's really simple. It's not going to add really hardly that much cost at all to the kit, and it'll save a lot of time for you guys. So just talking about welding these up before we get too far into that. Stitch weld, you can see weld an inch, skip an inch, weld an inch, skip an inch. You can weld them the whole way up, where whatever you want. That's just what we tend to go to, is just stitch welding it, because that makes it plenty solid. These bars here, we leave the leg length extra long, so you can trim them off and fit them how you want. You can drop them down even lower if you want to, or you can put them all the way up flush with this top. We like to drop them down a little bit below where it kind of hides them. So this one here, you can see I kind of made it come off the bracket just slightly. That's kind of how I fit it usually. Joey fit these ones over here, and they are a little bit more straight down off the bracket, which this is a Trans Am and the bracket's not, you know, perfectly square because it's got some bends and stuff in it, but you can do it either way, it's fine. But let's talk about measurements and what measurements you can look for. Well, first let's go check out this little tool we're going to start including. Coming over to the Trans Am here where everything's kind of out of the way and we can see better, I'm going to give you guys some measurements to go by, and we're going to talk about this little gauge that we're going to start including in the kit to help you guys line the headlight brackets up better. So just a rule of thumb, like I said in the beginning of the video, make sure the car is level before you get going, and that way you don't, or at least have a digital angle finder where you can zero it off of the inside of the door there and reference everything back to that. So if your frame rails are level like they should be after you get them welded in, zip my tape in here, from the frame rail to the top of the headlight bracket should be 12.5 directly vertical. Goes the same on this side. 12.5. That is your reference on your headlight bracket height. This is for Trans Am, Camaro. It does not matter. That's going to be your height off your frame rails if your frame rails are level. Now, on our instructions we talk about a measurement from the front of the shock tower and stuff. Now that everything's out of the way, depending on, like on this particular car, I'll give you an example. He has welded some cover panels in here and covered this, which we're still going to cut all this out. We've got some more chassis work to do to this one, but this has changed on this car, this face slightly. So this weld seam here is not going to change unless somebody's just mutilated the towers or something, but that's the same on both sides. So get a tape out, hook it on the weld seam, come down here, and you are 15 3/4 to the front side of the headlight brackets. And if you're square with the car, you should be the same on this side. Camera won't really focus, but you see what I'm talking about. For the Trans Am, it's going to be 15 3/4 to the front side of the headlight brackets on the outside corner, because they have a little bend. Forgot to show you right here. You'll notice it's got just a little bend in it right there. That's because these brackets go so deep to clear the electric motors. On the Camaro, there's something more like 15 3/4 to the back side of the headlight brackets. So those are your references there. Now those references are no good if you're trying to independently hold each bracket and try to fit it. When we realize this, and because we've been kind of spoiled having our fixture and not really had to mess with it the hard, I did do one at my house on my wife's car that we recently sold, OMG Boost, which I'll do a video on that telling you kind of about that. But I did hers at my house. It was an LT car, and it wasn't the most fun. It took a lot of extra time getting them headlight brackets lined up and stuff. So this little simple fixture we're going to start including in our kits, and this is just a piece of 1.5 by 1.5 square tube with 2 1/4-inch pieces of it's like 2 inch by 4.5 inch, somewhere around in there, welded on a couple sides. You know, it's not anything super fancy, but this is your lineup gauge. So this, I'll turn my angle finder on here. This should be pretty much level. You're going to line it up with the bottom of the headlight bracket here, the bottom over there. This is the correct spread distance for both Trans Am and Camaro. And even though the headlight brackets on the Trans Am go slightly in and back out, these are square to the frame rails. So you can see how I've got it here. Two pair of vice grip, clamping them together. You can use C-clamp, whatever you want, but this will get your headlight brackets the correct spread. It'll make them, you know, be square to each other, to where you can support this somehow to the ground, whether you set it on a chair, whether you put boxes up, whatever, and you can play with the spacing here, these measurements that I've give you, and get your headlight brackets exactly where they need to be so you can mock these tubes up. Because if you get these set in place, I mean, I personally recommend getting some other scrap metal and like making you a stand, or putting this on something that's pretty secure, whether it's C-clamping it to you know, a jack or something like that, you know, just so it don't wiggle around. And that way you can, you know, move it back and forth, get your measurements that I give you right, the 15 3/4 to the outside of here on both sides. If that's correct, you know, get your height 12.5 from the frame rail to the top of the headlight bracket. If that's correct, your headlight brackets are in place where they need to be. So I think this will greatly help, because we spend a lot of time on the phone trying to walk guys through, you know, just a simple way. And I've always, for years, I've told guys just to get a piece of square tubing and clamp the headlight brackets to it. But you really can't clamp across the back side, because the Trans Am, because of the pop-up headlights, they kind of go in and then back out. And so this is not square across the back of the bracket. So that really throws people off, it seems like. But it's intended to be that way. And I think including this in the kit, just not even an option, just including it with every kit, will be a real time saver for you guys struggling holding up your headlights. So I think that's all. I'm going to touch base on that for right now until we get the rest of the steps going. But I will say, for those of you that's made it this far in the video, do not, I mean, you can go ahead and maybe tack these in. Do not fully weld all this stuff in until you have confirmed that it is lined up. I tell people most of the time when they're doing one of these front end kits, if the hood is still on the car, leave the hood on the car. Take the fenders off, take everything off. But when that hood shuts, when you put the stuff back on the car, the hood is your lineup mark. You're gonna set your body line up through here with your fenders. Your hood is gonna only shut so far, and you're gonna have, it might shut a little bit further than it used to because the hood stops are not gonna be there, but you can pretty much tell if it's lined up with your fender height right there. But leave the hood on, and then you can see how far your bumper is sagging, because your bumper is gonna sag way more than you realize without any support on it. And you don't really know, you'll build that center support with the hoop and the little RSM piece in the middle, the laser cut piece. You'll get it all welded up, and then you'll shut your hood and you'll have a gap that big where you can see up in there because it's sagging down and you just didn't realize it. So if you can keep your hood on your car, that's a good lineup mark that you can get everything back up to height, get everything back up supported, then come back to the headlights and fully weld those in if they are lined up right. And another thing with this bracket, also, the reason why I want to make this 1/4 inch, which this is 1/4 inch, the reason why is because I want it robust enough to mount a headlight to it on both sides. And then you could actually just, you know, grab this, have headlights mounted on both sides and maneuver it around. If it's a little bit you know, off from our measurements. If it's not working out with your car, then you can move it around with the headlights actually bolted to it and get them lined up the way you want it before you put your tubes on there. I would show you on a set of these Trans Am headlights, but our friend Patrick here, he has cut his inside bolt holes off of his bracket, so we're gonna have to manipulate that a little bit. I will say on the Trans Am headlights, while we're talking about that, and I grabbed the wrong one, so I'm gonna have to set it down to pick it back up. When you put these on here, you can see that bracket where the fender bar comes down. It's gonna have to be trimmed out so it can bolt tight to that plate. You can see where the bolt holes are, and it's been kind of reamed out where it can be adjusted, but it's gonna, that bracket for the headlight's gonna have to be trimmed out so that will clear. This top piece that I'm holding, it will be cut off and deleted, and that's a question I get a lot of times as well, is, you know, these brackets aren't going on here at all. They're bumping into everything, and that's just, unfortunately, there's just not much you can do without having to trim away some of that for the fender bars. And for the Camaro, you have to take a few of the little outer pieces off as well to get them to work out. So I know I've talked a lot, but we get a lot of phone calls about this, and there's a lot of these kits out here, and we appreciate all the business, but you really can't even go to the drag strip anymore without seeing one of these kits. So I know a lot of people are running our kits, and we really appreciate it, but we always want to try to continue to improve and make things easier on you guys. And I know this isn't some kind of, you know, snap-on tool, but if it's the correct length and it just takes a couple sets of pliers or a couple C-clamps or something to make your guy's life, you know, super easy for lining up the headlights, that's what we want to do. So we'll move on to the next step and get some more stuff welded up on our Camaro over here and see how far we get. I'm trying to keep all the steps in order, but the next thing I'm going to do, this particular car has the stock ECU, and we're going to be using the fuse box bracket that we sell. And see, I've got this is the fuse box holder. It's actually two fuse and relay boxes. They just clip down in here. You just put a screwdriver in here and they lift out of this. Take this off. So I've already got it marked, but the bracket we sell is here, and it goes right like that. So I'm going to drill some holes. Probably just use these three. You can use that one, but it kind of gets right there on the ridge. I think some of the other models, that's a little bit fatter, and you can get through there, but I'm just going to use these three. We'll drill through here and get this bolted up, and then we'll get it back on the car and get it tacked in. fuse bracket welded on the car. Kind of videoed the process of that. Basically just a straight piece of tube. You can use many different sizes. This is just a 3/4 inch 065 piece. Cut a little peak on it, stuff it in the corner, weld it to the tube, and that supports this really good in its OEM location. Now, as we're progressing with this, I want to try to include most every detail that we have to do, or what you'll have to do to install. And one of those things, I'm trying not to miss anything, because I know this is spread out over multiple days just because I'm trying to video it all. But on the bumper, now this bumper, it's just a spare one he brought. It's seen better days. That's why I've got it flipped on its top. We're not really worried about scuffing it that much because it looks like it's scuffed up pretty good, but we still carefully laid it on the concrete. This lip right here, you'll need to go ahead and trim that off. Now, I don't know where I put it. Right here. This is what goes up under from the factory and attaches right in front of the AC condenser on that little piece across there on the factory core support. But you won't need that anymore. If you leave this on there, it's going to be flapping in the wind. So it's already got like a little seam for you to follow. What we use is a body saw. This is just you get these on Amazon. AirCap brand is what this is. Just hook. I've showed these before on my other videos, but air powered, really fine teeth. So you can cut stuff like this, cut holes in the bumper, you know, cut sheet metal, whatever. It's not gonna, you know, beat the crap out of it like using a big sawzall or something. So that's what I use to cut it. You can also use a cutoff wheel, but when you do that, it kind of melts it. So this is kind of the cleanest way. So get that out of your way. Now the bumper is ready to kind of mock up. On this particular car, it's kind of different. We're gonna have to change some stuff to make it work. Because like I said, he's cut his brackets off of his headlights, so we only have the outside portion of the bracket. And obviously this is not gonna do anything because nothing's gonna attach to it. The radiator that come off this car is pretty big. I usually say about 27.5 inches is as big as you want with one of these tube fronts, because that's going to go in between your headlight brackets with no issue. This one barely goes in between the frame rails, so it's like 30 inches or so wide. But it's going to work out because we're going to actually cut these headlight brackets off and just attach something right here, since this is not really going to be needed, and then we can push this radiator back. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this. There's not one set way that it has to be done, and that's why that's the beauty of having all these independent pieces, is that if you want to cut them apart and make them your own, or like in this case, he would have to buy a new radiator and you know, different stuff to make it work. But we're just going to cut the headlight brackets and do it that way. Another thing, he's got a turbo kit on this thing. I think it's a Ron Speed kit, but the intercooler on the ones in the past, we usually had to flip them upside down because the frame rails are in the way. But I think on this one, we might go ahead and mount the radiator, go ahead and do the support for the hood, and just make sure we have room for the intercooler. And then I might come in here and cut the end of these frame bars off to allow these tubes to come back down a little bit lower, and then support the intercooler from the top and maybe just underneath a little bit, kind of like we've done in the past on a couple other cars I've done videos on. So that's what we're going to do next, just kind of mock all this up and see how everything's going to lay out before we start welding everything together. So I ended up not doing the radiator first, ended up doing the hood latch first. And that's something that we get a lot of questions about, is the hood latch. How do you make the hood latch work? Well, this is the way that we've done it on several different cars. You're gonna trim away the excess metal around your factory hood latch bracket that's in your core support. The main reason why you keep this is because I like to keep the little safety catch there, so it functions exactly like an OEM hood when you do this. We have these little tube nests that we have for like our chassis table and stuff like that, so that's why we use these. But you can use tabs or whatever else and just basically just weld this thing to the hoop here, and that's about the height it's going to be. And I'm not going to shut it all the way because I ain't got the cable hooked up. But you can see it grabs just like a regular hood. And if you're going to use a factory hood latch, it might as well operate exactly like a factory hood. So we went ahead and got that took care of. The hoop's not all the way welded in, it's welded halfway around, just what I could reach without pulling anything else off. And we went ahead and cut the end of the headlight brackets off. And we're gonna just come off this end and go right to here to support that. There's a little bolt right there we can grab onto the back of the headlight. And that's pretty much what we're going to do next. Now we have room for the larger radiator to go in between here and not hit anything. And again, I said before, I'm probably going to cut the end of the frame rails off, move this support bar a little bit further back to where it will support the radiator, and somehow on the bottom, if we don't end up welding bungs or something on the side of it. So there's a lot of different things you can do with these tube front kits, a lot of different ways. And just because we got these two cars in here, this gives you a broad idea of the different things you can do. This car's got a lot of stuff under the hood, a lot of factory stuff. That car over there is more of a race car, so kind of two different ways to go about doing these with the cars being kind of different directions in their build. So next step, let's get this radiator in here and then to the intercooler, and then this thing will be pretty much done, besides buttoning up a lot of this little stuff like ground wires and different things we had to unhook when we got rid of all this factory sheet metal and stuff up here. Got to make sure to hook up all that stuff again. So the next part of this we're going to cover is getting the bumper attached to the front end kit. We've got the car on the lift. I've got a stand under it kind of supporting the bumper, because the bumper naturally is going to sag just under its own weight. And you can see up here we have some painter's tape and some cardboard shims kind of keeping the spacing the way it needs to be from the hood across there. Now you can adjust this a little bit, you know, with washers or shims or whatever once you get everything on, but you want to get it as close as you can before you start welding your braces onto the support plate. So the support plate we have bolted to the bottom of the bumper, and naturally this plate is going to rest in an unlevel position, so we have another stand underneath it holding it level. You want it level back to front. It's probably going to be pretty well level side to side, but you want it level this way. You don't want it leaned back like this or leaned forward like this. It's probably going to lean back like this naturally just because of its own weight. So get you something under here to support it. And once you've got everything pretty well set the way you want it, these little 1/4 inch rods, or this piece of 1/4 inch rod that we send with the kit, we just cut this and miter it a little bit. And I can't hold the light and this at the same time, but basically you're going to come off of here like this, off of this hoop, to the underside of that plate, and you're going to weld. They've got it marked. They cut these pieces yesterday after I left, but they're going to weld right there, and that's going to support your front bumper in the center. So we're going to get the welder fired up and get these tacked on. Hopefully I can get the camera under here and show myself doing this. Trying to get every detail, but it's kind of tough to video some of this stuff. So here we go. Got these 1/4 inch rods tacked on now. Another thing you want to watch out for when you're tacking them on, easy way to do it, use one of these little triangle magnets. You can get them at Harbor Freight, whatever. That'll make sure you're kind of square with the hoop going to the front. But another thing you want to consider, get you a little digital angle finder. You can get these on Amazon, whatever. This is a kind of expensive one, but we've got some cheaper ones here we normally use. Make sure you see we're like 28 degrees there. About 28 degrees there. Here we're 24 because these are a little bit more laid out. And we're also around 24 right there. So just make sure those are all kind of going in the same direction and the same angle, because you'll get everything tacked on and welded up, then you'll pull the bumper off and it'll look like a confused spider or something with the way these are going. So just make sure they're all kind of going the same direction. Get you some basic tools to verify that, like one of these little angle finders or those triangle magnets or whatever. So now what I'm probably gonna do is take these stands out, and I'll show you how we put these tabs on the bottom of these frame rails here. Looking in from the top, really the next thing you need to do is come in here and finish welding all this stuff where it does not move. It's really not going to move at the plate, it's going to move here where the weight's sitting on it. So come back in here before you do anything else and weld these completely up where they don't move on you. Another thing that's a good idea to do that I always pretty much do now whenever we install tube front kits is put some lower tabs on the bumper cover. So these are an option. They're just straight tabs, but they're an option from your drop-down menu when you order on the website. When you trim this off your bumper, you're still gonna have this lip around here. It'll probably have some threaded little pieces. You just take them off. Lay your tab right there, and it'll go right up against the frame rail, and you can just weld it right there. Run your bolt through there, and this will give you a point of rigidity in this lower corner, and that'll really help support the bumper, especially if you're going 200 plus, something like that. The wind's gonna really try to push your bumper down, so it's a good idea to have it attached right here. So that's just something I always do when I install them. We don't, most of the time, we don't even worry about supporting them on the sides, because that usually does okay. But right here, it's a good idea to get some support right here. So it's supported here and on the top. So with this car having the turbo kit on it, we had to mount the intercooler. And what we did for that, we come in here and trimmed these areas out of the bumper a little bit more shallow to make clearance for the intercooler. We also trimmed the end of the frame rails off a little bit short. Now this is touching right here, so that's no good, but I wanted to leave it there until I got the intercooler mounts made, top and bottom, because now that it's in place, I'll come back in and trim just a little bit more off those so they don't touch the boot, and we'll be good to go. You can see I put the crossbar more towards the front, not necessarily under the radiator, but where I could make the supports for the intercooler off of that bar. Since the radiator, I made uprights because it already had some threaded bungs on the back. That's the way the radiator was supported before, with there and this, which I didn't use this because it's a little bit tall, but I just did little uprights to hold it right there. So that all worked out. So now everything's ready to blow apart. Everything's pretty much mounted in there. The headlights, I'll show you what I did on that. I used, these are actually the factory, I think they go on the top, the strap for the core support for the headlights. I actually trimmed it down and welded it to the bracket there and went back to here to make the headlight pretty secure once we got it in position. Again, normally wouldn't do that. Normally we just bolt it onto our headlight brackets like they're designed, but with the radiator being too big, we trimmed it off, and with this customer cutting his headlight bracket halfway in two, I was missing half of it, so that's why I had to do that. So now we're just going to disassemble everything. I've got a few little spots I've got to come back and weld once everything gets out of my way, and then we'll get some paint on this and reassemble it and try to get all this wiring and stuff tucked in as cleanly as possible. Another reason why I might have mentioned it, normally we would flip this intercooler and do the inlets under the headlights, but he waited a while to get this cold side from, I think it's on 3 or Huron speed, I forget which turbo kit this really is. But I didn't want to have to start modifying all of his cold side. So we was able to use what he had with doing it this way. But normally for a tubular kit like this, I would flip the intercooler and leave the frame rails long. But again, with a kit being multiple pieces like this, you can customize it, trim it, put bars kind of where you want, and make it your own. We got everything painted and now it's ready for reassembly. We're gonna wait till in the morning though, because we use enamel and it usually takes about a day to dry where it's not gonna leave fingerprints or something like that. So we'll let it dry overnight and we'll get it put back together in the morning. This shows it now that we've got the bumper on. As far as the wiring and stuff, just do the best you can. If you've got stock wiring, we routed the harness kind of around the front because it had enough length to do that. We zip tied it where we could to the bars, made it kind of blend in. He's got a bunch of wires here that a lot of it's not being used, where this car's had some things added on to it, rewired and stuff. So that's, you know, you can only do so much without rewiring the whole car and trying to make it clean. Shows you the hood latch cable. We run it through here, kind of around the side. As far as the ground wires, I actually put a nutsert right in the top of the frame rail, and I've got another one underneath this frame rail at the end, just as a good spot to ground, where you're not just running a self tapper or something in there. That wraps up its job. I hope this video shows a little bit of detail, or a lot of detail, on how we go about installing one of these tube front kits. Every situation is going to be a little bit different. Say hello to my wife. Every situation is going to be a little bit different. You just have to adapt as you go, whatever's best for your scenario. So that's it. It's been a long time coming. I know you guys been asking for the install video, and I hope this doesn't bore you, but helps you if you decide to buy our front end kit. So check out the website, rock-solid-motorsports.com. We keep these in stock, no wait time ever. See you guys.